account. So can I remind all members and officers making a contribution to the meeting to use a microphone, or your comments will not be heard. We will now start the meeting by doing a roll call of committee members. Wendy.
Thanks, Chair. Just bring that closer. So I'll start with yourself, Councillor Wragg.
Present.
Vice Chair, Councillor Chamberlain.
Present.
Councillor Brown.
Present.
Councillor Davey.
Present.
Councillor De Sarum.
Present.
Councillor Howe.
Present.
Councillor Key.
Present.
Councillor Pook. I don't think we have, no. Councillor Pratt.
Present.
Councillor Rylance.
Present.
Councillor Skinner.
Philip.
Present.
And Councillor Woodward.
Present.
Thank you. We are quorum for today's meeting, Chair.
Thank you. And apologies, Wendy?
Oh, yes, we have 3 apologies. Councillor Bloxham, Councillor Gazzard and Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you. Can I remind members that if you leave the meeting during an application for any reason, you will not be able to vote, take part in the vote, okay? It's quite a strict rule. So the speakers for today's planning application can be found on page 3 of the agenda. I'd like to welcome Linda Trim, John Smith, Carol Trim, Geron Cayley, Councillor Ray Steer-Kemp and Graham Fewell, who will all be speaking on application 21, 2217, a major reserved Winslade Park, Cliff St Mary. Agenda item 4, do any members have any interest to declare? If so, please raise your hand and state which agenda item your interest relates to, the nature and type of your interest. Wendy, can you call the names, please?
Do you want me to do it by roll call or by hands up? Entirely
Well, if members could indicate, put their hands up if they have any declarations of interest. Councillor Howe.
Just my usual one, because I'm a ward member and obviously have spoken to many residents around this site.
Yeah.
So lobbying and everything else.
That's fine. Okay, anybody else? Well, I will declare an interest because yesterday I had an email from the agent with images attached. It was for information purposes, but because it's from the applicant, I consider it lobbying. Thank you.
If you're going to say that, then Chair, I'm afraid probably all of us.
Yeah, that's why I said it. So
if it's a blanket one, that's
you didn't, Eleanor. So can you put your hand up if you had that email, please? Wendy, can you note?
Yep, sorry. So that's Skinner, Howe, Brown, Key, De Sarum, and that's it. Okay, and that's the email with the images attached. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Matters of urgency, agenda item. Sorry, Ollie?
I did have an email from a resident, which also had some images attached.
Okay. Yeah, that was the same one.
Right, but there were only images from the resident attached to the email that I saw.
Wendy's noted that. Matters of urgency, there are none. Item 6, to agree any items to be dealt with after the public have been excluded, there are none. So we come on to agenda item 6, which is why we're here, planning application 21, 2217, major reserve matters, Winslade Park, Cliff St Mary. And can I ask Gavin to present his report, please?
Thank you, Chair. So it's the same presentation as you saw at the last meeting. Just to locate yourselves, the red line on this plan isn't the application site. That's a site that's been approved at reserve matters already for some houses and some the site. We today met on the car park here to view the plans, discuss the items for which we were at the site visit for, which was to look at the height and the massing of the buildings, the impact on the trees and the landscaping, and the impact of the internal and external lighting on the surroundings. We also visited number 52, Cliffs Valley Road, so that we could see from a third-party perspective. So the application site is edged in red, part of the car park of Winslade Manor. Proposal is for 40 apartments over three blocks. Block A and B, as they're termed on this drawing, would be connected by a podium access at first floor levels. Block C would be independent of a podium level, having been removed due to concerns about the impact on the trees in the car park during the termination of the application. So these are more of the images. The parking would be underneath the podium access in this area and around the peripheries of the site. 74 parking spaces in total. Some of the floor plans split into four on the majority of the floors, and there's 4 floors in each block, to a total height of 12.9 metres above ground level. And as we discussed on site, some of the ground levels would be altered, raised by ½ metre in areas and reduced at the front of the buildings because the site has a natural fall towards the back of the site. So elevation-wise, note the Powell and Moyer extension to Winslade Manor, and these are a modern interpretation of that. Three main floors and then a penthouse glazed on top. On blocks A and C, the 2-storey element extends the majority of the site, and then the 3rd and 4th stories are stepped back. On block B, it doesn't step back. Building in height form, and you note that dotted line, which is the cut and fill across the site, because the site does slope. So just going through some of these in terms of the sections, they're quite small on the screen, but you'll note that it does fall away from Winslade Manor. That has a basement area, car park area, and then down to the buildings where they're cut in at the first bit and then raised out of the existing ground level at the back. And the parking around the edge of the site is slightly raised, the road level taking account of a flat road level. So aerial image of the site, I think this is number 52 over here where we were today. Yeah, this property here, where on site, and some of these trees, this is an older image, have been removed. They weren't part of the preservation order. And some of these trees in the middle have also been taken out. And these trees have got a preservation order on, as well as this tree belt in the background. So just a drone image to really show the context of the site in terms of the commercial uses that are on site. So these buildings are now in use as offices. Some of the buildings haven't yet been taken up into offices. You see the Grade 2 listed church that we saw from the site, and then you see the properties in Cliffs Valley Road in the background. View from the churchyard. We didn't go into the churchyard today, but you saw that was, and then views from the car park before the hoarding was put up, the green hoarding that was on site today. So these are just some images. I won't go through these in too much detail because you saw it for yourselves in somewhat lesser leaf than these today. This is an image of a cherry picker that personally I went up, helped to take measure to the appropriate height at the floor level of the top floor and took some photos. You can see this time of year they were actually done in October last year, and you note some of the tree coverage, but you'll have seen that for yourself today. It's just to give an indication of the height and what you would see. And this is an image from probably 54, 56, looking across to the site itself. So I think what we saw from the site today was there is a fair amount of tree cover across the site. In some areas it's thicker than others, and the blocks do range in how far they are from the boundary of the site. So majority, they are 30 to 40 metres from the boundary of the site. Block B is 50 metres. And I know it's difficult when looking at things at height, so 12.9 metres in height, we were on the ground. You had to kind of imagine where the floor level would be. So you need to take a view as to whether there's an appropriate distance between the existing residential properties and the site, especially in terms of it being 4 floors in height. And what you may see from there, and I think some members were slightly concerned about the light spill from those, and we had some discussions on site, which maybe we can have a bit more of a discussion about in a moment, about whether there's any mitigation that could take place or what your concerns are around those. But I think members saw what they needed to in terms of the 3 criteria that we looked at last time. So I'll leave it to the discussion for more. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right, I'd like to welcome the speakers for today then, please. Linda Trim, would you like to come forward? Thank you. Put your microphone on, please.
Much. Thank you, Chair.
You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. There is no doubt that these towering blocks with their service road and parking on raised ground levels adjoining our 2-storey homes and gardens are controversial. We have purposefully shared our viewpoints, highlighted bias and requested equilibrium to enable this committee to achieve a fair, balanced resolution. We ask you all to put yourselves in our shoes. Would you defend your homes against what you consider is inappropriate development? Of course you would. As our representatives, you are the voices of the people of East Devon, but the people of Cliff St Mary hate these proposals. We needed clarification about distances between our homes and the exact height of these towers. 12.9 metre tall flats with increased ground levels of virtually 4.5-storey edifices. Councillor Howe's concise objection is perfect. It's too tall and too close to the woodland. With so much acreage available, is it necessary to vertically stack 40 prominent flats so close to our homes in a restricted car park? This parking is essential for the employment users now, but will be lost to this development. Outline plans pledge 395 extra parking spaces in Zone J, but these have yet to materialise. Today you were invited to view my home and garden. It is the nearest receptor to Block A, which is less than 25 metres from my boundary, and between is a new heightened road and parking spaces only 15 metres from that boundary. Here, the deciduous tree belt has the least high trees, around 11 metres in height. That's 3 metres below these tall structures. The woodland refuses to shed its leaves for a site meeting today. Global warming tells it autumn is not approaching yet, but the chainsaws are. Here there is inadequate poor screening, worsened by tree felling and hedgerow loss this spring during the bird nesting season. Now I can observe the dress code of visitors to the manor from my dining room, which is sited 170 metres opposite. But these proposed flats are 3 times closer. Whilst our gardens are large, these open spaces are intrinsically vital to us. Because as environmentalists, we spend as much time outdoors as indoors. We will lose our privacy and enjoyment through overlooking from the multiple living rooms, balconies and elevated gardens. Lighting and noise from 40 multiple occupancy flats will pollute our natural woodland, harming wildlife and our enjoyment of the countryside. Vehicle lights and noise will obtrude into our living and sleeping rooms. These blocks will dominate the skyline. Our homes are our sanctuaries. We have never said no to development on this brownfield site, but we ask for the right development in the right place, and this is not it. This is not a large urban town or city. This is the rural historic village of Cliff St Mary, and we ask you to protect our small community from these inappropriate proposals. Thank you all very much for listening.
Thank you. John Smith next, please. Mr. Smith, you have 3 minutes.
At our last meeting 3 weeks ago, via Zoom, I asked you to imagine that you were a resident of Clifton St Mary, Winslade Park, and in fact in the houses such as you've just heard from Linda. Now that you've been on site, you can appreciate the proximity of the new building to the established village and the houses that back onto it. And it's a curious quirk of human nature that the closer you are to a high building, the taller it seems. You know, the Eiffel Tower looks like a pimple on the horizon from 2 miles away. Stand underneath it and it looks as though it's reaching to the stars. And that's what it will feel like for a lot of people in Clifton St Mary. Now, I know that you inevitably want to get this item off the agenda. It's been around for a long time, partly because of COVID and the other problems. But just let's all remember that these buildings are going to be here for possibly 80 or 100 years or more, long beyond our lifetimes. The decisions you're making today will affect not just the residents present at Clifton St Mary, but also those of the future. If we can stand out against these tall blocks and finish up with a development that does fit in with the community, that's cohesive, then future generations actually won't even notice the difference because it'll be seamless. In fact, the only people that will remember will be those that have an interest in the built landscape, and then it'll be the architects that get all the praise for a lovely development. If we build flats like this, what the people will say is, who on earth gave permission for that monstrosity there? Because it's always the architects that get the praise, and it's the planning committees that get any brickbats that are going. So I ask you really to just remember that the time you're taking now is infinitesimal compared to the future and the well-being of not just this generation who live in Clifton St Mary, but the long-term community of the village. And these blocks of flats, obviously, are not cohesive. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Carol Trim, please. You have 3 minutes.
Not related, I say, with all due respect. Thank you, good morning. Well, you're now very familiar with the site, but I put this in context to the hybrid planning application 21001 MOUT, which was the original application, which has morphed over time, but in essence, that negotiated a planning approval with the council for 38 new dwellings on a Zone A, which was outside the original boundaries of Winslade Park, in favour of retaining all the existing commercial buildings on this site. Zone D remains as a small section of valuable car park, seeks approval for reserve matters for 40 residential apartments, 3 very large separate blocks, 4 stories high, with a scale and form which will dominate the skyline, cause some harm to the historic asset of Winslade House, and adversely impact the adjoining residential area. Continued local opposition has been submitted to the planners ad infinitum, hitherto to no avail. However, the facts remain. This is a large-scale residential development within a very restricted area with no public infrastructure for luxury apartments and second home accommodation. Design of the development, distinctive, certainly different, but I argue not sustainable. Vast amounts of concrete structure, windows and viewing terraces elevated 2 to 3 stories above eaves roof level of the neighbouring properties, The perimeter areas are crammed with car parking spaces and hard landscaping, and all requiring high levels of management organisation and totally reliant on the screening background of preserved woodland. Arboriculturally, the wooded areas will require consistent management to survive for tree protection, thinning, and to deal with ash dieback. More significantly, due to the mass scale of the buildings, they will impose their own environmental impact on the surrounding trees, blocking sunlight, shading, change of localised wind speeds and groundwater patterns, and subsequent effects on the wildlife. Planning recommendation for approval is necessarily challenged on this complex, mixed-use, highly commercial site. There are clear limitations on both the proposed living accommodation and its resulting impact on the surrounding environment, which would have far-reaching effects. This is a high-intensity proposal for this site. It is not supported. Thank you.
Thank you. Garen Cayley, you have 3 minutes.
Councillors, the democratic system relies on you, the very people who've elected to represent us in East Devon. We're reliant on your independent judgment when deciding the outcome of complex planning applications. How can it be possible that residents of Cliff St Mary have to independently send you the other half of the balanced view that clearly should have been included within the officer's report? We know that East Devon is required to provide more housing, but clearly this is going up in the sky with the design is not the solution. The residents accepted the initial concept of 14 houses, but the developer didn't stop there. They submitted 3 stories when it arrived at the outline stage, now 4 stories at the detailed stage. They've completely ignored the plans that have been approved by East Devon District Council throughout the democratic process. Surely the question that needs asking, quite how could the officers in East Devon District Council Planning Department recommend this, and why? Please remember that it was the councillors from this very committee at East Devon, many of the people sitting here today, that told the developer at the outline stage, go and reduce the height of the buildings from 3 stories to 2 stories. Instead, they've increased it from 3 floors to 4. The officer's report clearly points out the height of the building is just 12.9 metres high, or to put another way, over 42 feet. Together we've put up balloons in the garden at a ground level of 12.9 metres, so you have quite some idea of how high this building will be. On top of the 12.9 metres high, the design needs to be raised out of the flood zone. How can it be possible to recommend approval for this? We still don't have really any idea where this development will end up. The applicant's agents have chosen to send you drone pictures, supposedly taken from the different floors. The pictures differ greatly from that of our simple balloon that can be verified at 12.9 metres. The developer appears to have relabelled the floors, trying to make you believe that this building has 1 less floor than it actually does. These buildings in Zone D are of huge mass in terms of height, bulk and scale. The agents are keen for you to see how it integrates with Winslade Manor, but they don't seem quite as keen to show you how it will impact with our estate. Moving on to the tree office report, it clearly states that the design does not deliver a harmonious and sustainable relationship between structures and trees. Whilst the applicant has amended their design to the trees and the buildings will cause into the future. How can it be possible after 14 months of negotiation, meetings and amendments, you have in the detailed planning application in front of you today with a recommendation for approval, but we don't even have the basic details of the lighting, the finished levels of the building, or quite how high the trees will end up being. As you've seen for yourself today, there still remains no answers of the questions of how anybody can safely walk from this development into the village. Councillors, for your own integrity, please ask the developers to do exactly what you asked them to do at the outline stage and reduce this back to 2 stories. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, Bishop's Cliff Parish Councillor Ray Steer-Kemp, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, councillors. Bishop's Cliff Parish Council are grateful for this final opportunity to address you and express once again our objections to this application now that you have had the opportunity to see the application site for yourselves. Hopefully you were as impressed as we are with the wonderful parkland setting of the Grade 2 listed manor house. On approaching the application site, you will have noticed Winslade House, the modern 3-storey commercial building on the right side and to the rear of Winslade Manor. This modern building is set down at a lower level, and consequently the roof line is much lower than that of the manor house. Despite its close proximity, this large modern building is much lower than the manor house, is not obtrusive, and seems to sit comfortably within its setting. On the other hand, the proposed 3 4-storey apartment blocks will be raised above the existing ground level slightly and present unacceptable massing and imposing structures that will harm the setting of the area and of the listed Cliff St Mary Church and the Manor House. In our view, the apartment blocks are too high at 4 stories, are far too urban in appearance, and we consider a much more sympathetic design is needed. You have now also had the opportunity to see for yourselves the woodland area that separates the proposed apartment blocks from the properties in Cliffs Valley Road. And hopefully you will agree with us that the screening effect will not be as effective as suggested by the applicants. You have seen how sparse the trees are in various areas, particularly at the height of the proposed apartments. And please bear in mind that the deciduous trees today have still retained much of their leaf cover due to the exceptionally warm weather. As the trees shed the remainder of their leaves over the next few weeks, the screen will become less and less effective. This will result in the loss of privacy and allow light and noise to penetrate, which will adversely affect the amenity and privacy of neighbouring residents. For these reasons, we continue to object to this application and we consider it should be refused. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Now we have the agent, Graham Fuel.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you once again for giving us the opportunity to promote the scheme. Obviously, this is, I won't go through all of the details we went through previously when we met, because we put forward our case then for why we felt this was a robust design for the location and appropriate and taking due account of all the local constraints. But mindful of the site visit I know you've taken this morning, I thought it was worthwhile just covering a couple of the points. The main reasons cited at the previous committee meeting were, for the site visit, were to sort of investigate the scale and mass and the impact of lighting and potential overlooking of the 3 buildings in the locations as shown. And I think it's important to sort of consider why we're looking at that, and that's obviously in the context of the built form in relation to not only the manor house itself, but also the existing properties on Cliffs Valley Road that I understand the objectors are obviously principally concerned with, but also the relationship to the trees and the appropriateness about how the buildings have been sited. Just taking the easy one first, I mean, with Winslade Manor, Historic England, as I mentioned before, have endorsed the scheme, which is a difficult thing to achieve. And so we very much stand by our commitment to these being the correct scale of building to correctly be the sort of smaller friends of the existing manor house. Smaller, perhaps more broken up buildings just simply wouldn't be appropriate in that location, and I think we would have struggled with Historic England had we gone down that route. Trees, we've worked really closely with the council ecologists on making sure that we actually take full account of the existing trees. We've moved the buildings around a lot, especially the group of turkey oaks, to make sure that they can grow to maturity. There's been some concern that there is some intention on thinning down the tree bank between Cliffs Valley Road and the development, none of which is true. It's simply that the tree bank there will have to be maintained, and there's a maintenance regime in place, but that is it's protected and will continue to be protected. Other issues that need to be considered in the context of all of this is obviously, and the main one is really the relationship with Cliffs Valley Road. We would point out that the back-to-back distances are enormous. They are vastly in excess of what you would typically expect, even bearing in mind the fact that the buildings are higher, are taller buildings than the existing buildings on Cliffs Valley Road. The tree bank will obviously continue to create an important barrier between the two. Light overspill, which is considered a concern from the lit building at the moment of the Manor House, should be reduced by actually having a lighting scheme at the rear, which is due to be conditioned, which will actually help manage the light levels at the rear. So one would hope that these buildings might perform some task of actually screening the over provision of light in the area. The sustainability of the designs, I think, needs to be considered. It was raised by some of the objectors. All of these buildings will be built to current building reg standards, but none of them rely upon gas for their heating systems.
That's
they're all,
3 minutes, Mr. Fuel.
okay, they're all detailed designed, and they will rely on air source heat pumps. As I said, we've previously issued some updated information, which you referred to earlier, which we hope manages your considerations.
Thank you. Thank you. Now the ward member, Councillor Mike Howe.
Thank you very much, and thank you, committee, for allowing us the site visit and coming and visiting the wonderful area that we live in. I really don't know what to add to what the residents have said. You know, this is one of those schemes where in so many ways you see the wonderful aspects of what has been created at Winslade Manor. You also see the wonderful estate you've got next door to it that the residents live in. And what you didn't see is our lovely little church right in the middle of it all. But also, of course, it's the wildlife that you can't see, but you can see the woods where it is. And that is still the fundamental for me. I really struggle with this because I understand English Heritage's recommendations. You know, they like the scheme, but they are one statutory body compared to all the others. And although none have objected to this, there are always those things we need to look at and bear in mind carefully with our local plan and the neighbourhood plan that is still in force in Cliffs St Mary. You know, I mean, there are, if committee is minded to approve, there are a number of things I wish to raise as a possible conditions if it goes that way. But I'm at present, I certainly can't support a recommendation for approval at this time and wish to see what committee says. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, now I'm going to allow questions to the developer. If anyone wants to ask questions, does anyone have any questions, please? You do. Would you come back, Mr. Field, please? And this is just questions and answers, no statements. I did give you quite a bit of leeway at the previous meeting. That's so that members could have all the information on which to base decision.
I understood. Can I refer to my colleagues if I need
to? Right, Ollie.
There we go. Oh, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wonder what the rationale is for siting the buildings where they are, and why not further back from the trees, which would minimise the disruption to the wildlife that Councillor Howe has referred to, and minimise the inconvenience for the residents behind.
Yeah, I mean, the necessity for locating the buildings where they are was predicated out of the necessity to maintain as much of the existing car parking as we could, because again, the objectors have clearly made points about the quantity of car parking being appropriate for the use. So there was a balancing act to be had about the positions of the buildings, and dragging them too far forward would have gotten in the way of that provision, or at least it would have started to have wrapped car parking round into an area which would have blurred public and private areas for the residential dwellings. There's also a thing where, and I'll come back to it, that the quantity of distance between the backs of the properties we considered really quite generous, particularly in light of the tree bank that's in that location. So they were not sort of pushed as far back as we could possibly achieve. They were merely put in there as on balance with a number of issues, and that we included, you'll note from the scheme that on earlier proposals we did actually have the building set further back with access into the parking areas in between at the fronts of the buildings, but we elected to actually move and took up a reasonable amount of space. We actually moved the buildings further forward so that access road that provides the access into all of the car parking actually helps to create the additional distance between the units. So those were, if you like, part of a number of justifications for the positions of the buildings. Moving the building block C further forward would have started to have had an impact on the church, and we were mindful of how those issues may be addressed as well.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Ollie?
It does, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Councillor Rylance.
Thank you, Chair. So my question is, if you had planning permission for 3-floor blocks, why are we suddenly looking at 4-floor blocks? Why didn't you just go ahead with the 3-floor blocks?
The 3-floor, the central block outline permission indicated a 3-floor block with a pitched roof on it, and so we took the view as part of a sort of rounded consideration of the scheme as a whole, that actually one thing we could do is to actually use that roof space for habitable space effectively. Now, one might argue that actually putting the penthouses on top is more than sort of filling a roof space, but that must be considered, in our opinion, in the context of the fact that compared to the outline scheme, this is not a continuous linear development running from one side of the site to the other, which in itself would have provided 50% of the apartments overlooking directly onto the tree belt. What we actually did was turn the units, creating these substantial gaps in between them, so that actually the scale and mass of them was reduced, albeit at the expense, if you like, of some moderate additional space at 3rd floor level, but on balance, and actually trying to look at a design that English Heritage, or Historic England, I beg your pardon, would have endorsed. This was the approach that we went down. So we see that the use of that roof space could be better accommodated.
Thank you. Gavin Spiller would like to come in, please.
Yeah, can I just clarify? At the outline stage, you were looking at the principle of the development and the access to it. You weren't looking at the design of the 3-storey blocks or the quantum of development within it. So, or the scale or the massing. So all you granted at outline was the principle of putting 40 apartments on this site. So the designs that were come up with at the outline stage were purely illustrative, just to give an impression of what may be able to go on site. But there was a strong recommendation in that outline report that the designs of the apartments put forward at that stage wouldn't be acceptable. So there isn't permission for 3-storey blocks. At this stage, this is what you're considering as the first design to either approve or refuse.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? Right, members. Councillor Skinner.
Thank you. I've been looking at this site for many, many years, and I can remember the actual original proposals was for far more housing density to this. I think what we need to be concentrating on is what is in front of us. This is a reserved matters application. It has outline planning permission, and it has planning for 40 units. So that is what we need to focus on here today. I'm really pleased, Madam Chair, that we've been out to site, because I think when you go out to site, it's all very well seeing these applications on a piece of paper. When you go out to site and something, and the scale that we've got here, and its impact on the existing buildings on site, it's really key to take that on board and to understand what that is. Followed with that, of course, is the people who live within this vicinity of this application, and going on site as well to the lady's house. Thank you very much for that we're able to go in and see it from their perspective, from their side, outside looking in, as well as from inside looking out. And that was really, really important. From my perspective, I think that the design of these buildings, in complementing what is the wing of the original listed house, Grade 2 house, actually complements the type of development that could be seen on this site by having it in height. We would probably end up with one of two choices on this particular site. You could either have mass scale on the floor, which would take up far more land, or we have it in height. It's not difficult to work out. What we have to ensure is that with the height that's being proposed, is it acceptable within the confines of where we're proposing to put these apartments? I think when you see the linkage between two apartment buildings and what was obviously going to be a linkage of the third, but that the applicants have taken on board the fact of the trees and trying to work within the environment of which they're working with, they've actually worked out quite a difficult scale of buildings in quite a difficult site in wanting to ensure that it fits in harmony with the other buildings that are around. I'll lean to my dear colleague on the left-hand side. I believe I'm right in saying that I can remember in the past, and perhaps with the help of the officer in Gavin Spiller, that there were actually 5 different things within this site vicinity of graded, listed properties. The house, the church, the bridge, the ground itself, and there's another one, Mike, and Councillor Howe, and I forget what that is, but it certainly fits within a vernacular of having to fit in with really the listed development of which we're trying to make something work. Something is going to happen on this site. In fact, we've already passed an outline application for that to take place. Don't be lost with that. We're not here deciding whether we want this planning or not. An outline application has already been passed by this committee. It's how we make that application work as well as we possibly can, with fitting in with what is the old and the new of modern 21st century development and making that work. I understand from the people living within Cliff St Mary that I would imagine that their main concern, from what I'm hearing, is the height of these buildings, and particularly in context of the 4th level of some of these developments, these apartment blocks that have been put in. I personally, and it's my personal view, that I don't see how we can descale these from a 4th height of building, because we would then be moving away from the 40 apartments that are there. If we move away from the 40 apartments that are there, to be able to try to manipulate this application by descaling it would not work. It's either we support this application or we don't support this application. Because if we actually take down the units, or however many units would be within this site from the top floors and taking them down a level, would mean that then to get the 40 units, there'd need to be another block somewhere else to fit in. That isn't going to work on this site with absolutely reconfiguring the whole of the site. So what that means is, if you go down that path, what you're saying is refusal. And members are up to having refusal if that's what they want to have. Of course they do. I actually think that over the many years that this worked, in the negotiations that the planning officers have worked tirelessly in trying to maintain what is keeping the environment of which it is working within, has actually worked out a really good plan and come up with something really good. Now, I know that wouldn't be what the people of Winslade, particularly the houses and lady number 52 and the likes, want to hear. They don't want to hear that, but we sit here as planning committee members. We have to sit on the wall and make tough decisions, and not everybody is always going to be happy with the outcomes of the decisions that we make. But for my proposal is going to be, I would love to hear, I would like to hear what other members have to say. I am going to go, Madam Chair, with the recommendation that's in front of us, but I would very much like to hear what other members may have in some other conditions, and Councillor Howe spoke about some other conditions. He wanted to hear how the debate went and wanted to put in perhaps some other conditions to see what they may be, of which I'm more than happy to open up to that as we go forward. But what I am going to put onto the table now is that now I've been on site, I want to move the recommendation of approval as it stands, but I'm open to conditions if they come forward, and lighting, the glass, and these other things that other members want to speak about. I won't speak about it all, otherwise other members don't get that opportunity. Speak about these things. Let's get into a good place. Let's get it into a good place. I think we can get it into a good place, and let's move forward. I'll leave it to that. Look forward to a seconder, if I may, Madam Chair.
Is there a seconder, please? Councillor Woodward, would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you. I entirely agree with Councillor Skinner. I'm also open to consider further conditions. But on the massing and the height, I think a point was made about if you're underneath the Eiffel Tower, it looks very large. And also where the balloons have been placed, yes, but they're right on the boundary. We've heard that there's considerable distance between these proposed buildings and the existing houses. I think that distance between the two buildings gives the sufficient, or reduces the appearance of the height, so that the overlooking as well would be less intrusive. So I'm seconding the proposal, but also I think we mentioned, or it was discussed about glazing and how that might help the lighting issues. So I would like to, if we could investigate that further, I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you. Councillor Desarum.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Chair. Firstly, I'd like to thank the ward member for his input today at the site visit. I'd also like to thank the applicant and agent because I think they were very helpful. And I think that it's been very helpful to go on the site visit to understand the points made by the various residents. Secondly, I like to confirm that I note that the buildings have been moved and they've been adjusted to protect the trees, which is a great concern. And secondly, I noticed the agent touched on it this morning that the light condition scheme could be put forward to help with light protection. And I also note that Historic England have obviously raised no objections. For me, looking at it, when I looked at the overview paperwork, Block A was of real concern, particularly having visited number 52 Clyst Valley Road and seen that it could be an issue, because as we go around the blocks, it was pointed out, I think by Councillor Pratt, that the trees are less dense in number the further you get round the blocks to Block B and Block C. And I note that obviously they've had the impact, Block C has the impact on the church, and it's been moved forward, as the agent said, to take into account this. So I would like committee to consider asking the applicant to go back and produce an alternative design, particularly for Block A. I understand that Block B and C is what it is, and I also understand, as Councillor Skinner quite rightly said this afternoon or this morning, that we have outline for 40 units. So I don't think anyone is disputing the fact that we've got the outline, but I think, as John Smith said, we've got to look at development to fit in with the community seamlessly for the long-term community of the village. So I think, for me, Block A poses the most problem, which is why I would like to have defer, but obviously we've got the other proposals on the table at the moment. And thank you very much, Chair. I will leave it there and allow the time for others to make their very valuable contribution. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right, any more speakers, please? Councillor Key.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, I don't think any of us live on that estate, which is unfortunate probably because we might all have a different opinion. And I think that the people who do live on that estate actually gave a very, very good and essential report on it. I mean, you can quite see why that the architect either doesn't live there. The Block A is the problem, and I think that because that is more visible from the front of that lovely Winslade house. I mean, it's actually going to block a lot of the view from that as well. If that could have been reduced by 1, if not 2 floors, I think that would have been better. The design of these properties, as we saw on the maps, are not too bad, but I thought that the glass on top looks absolutely ridiculous. It really does. It's not a bit in keeping with anything around there at all. And it makes them look really, well, unprofessional in my opinion. The closest to the trees, yes, I do appreciate that, because once the leaves are gone, you're going to be able to look right through those trees. And you'll see all the houses there. I'm sorry, I can't support this application as it stands, really, with the height of these buildings. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Key. Councillor Davey.
Thank you, Chair. I think we have to remember the application is for Winslade Park. We're not looking at an extension to Clyst St Mary, even though it effectively is that. And it's Winslade Park that it has to relate to. And I think the designs do actually relate quite well. I don't agree with Councillor Key, because when we looked back towards the Powell and Moya extension, you've got the same kind of thing, a kind of glass terrace looking back at you. So I think it does relate quite well to that. I appreciate these buildings are going to be visible to nearby residents. There's no getting away from that. But we have to remember that you do not have a right to a view when it comes to planning. You have a right to light, but not to a view. And I feel the distance there actually ensures that it won't be intrusive. And the screening, yeah, I appreciate when the trees have no leaves in the winter, and there are lights on there, that could be a concern. I think trees, even in winter, actually provide quite a lot of screening. You've got a lot of twigs there, and they do kind of break things up, so you're not getting a direct view through in the same way. And of course, it's within the residents' gift to plant trees in their gardens that perhaps will retain leaves in the winter, and to ensure that they have some screening there as well. I don't live in the development we're talking about here, but I've also, in the house where I live, had 2 developments near me that now look backwards towards my house. When I moved in, there wasn't anything there, and they're an awful lot closer than this. So I put in more trees. I would like to see some conditions on the lighting on that northern side, I think it is.
I think we'll come back to Councillor Howe for that at the end.
Yep.
Yeah, but you carry on.
Okay. Yeah, I think with the appropriate conditions, I feel this is probably the best design that we're going to get in the circumstances, and given that there's outline permission already for the 40 units.
Thank you, Councillor Davey. Councillor Rylance.
Thank you, Chair. So I wasn't on this committee when the first application came in, so I'm seeing this fresh. What struck me about the middle block, Block B, is how forbidding the rear of it's going to be.
Can you bring your mic a bit
forward,
please?
It's effectively going to be 4 floors, pretty blank, facing onto the back end of those houses. You can see the manor house and you can see the Moya building through the trees already, and there are still leaves on the trees. And I just think we have to consider, well, this is from the garden of number 52, we have to consider that these buildings are going to be a lot closer. And what are the developers going to do to mitigate that feeling? Because if you can already see the manor house, which you can quite clearly through the trees, and you can already see the 1970s building quite clearly through the trees, in a few weeks you're going to be able to see them very clearly indeed. With buildings a lot closer, I think the feeling of looming will be much greater, and I just want to know what the developers are able to do to mitigate that feeling of looming if we do get to the stage where we okay this planning application, because I think that's what could be the most bothersome thing about this, that they'll feel as though they're looming over people's gardens.
Thank you. Councillor Howe, would you like to come in and put forward your mitigation measures, please?
I don't know about mitigation, Chair, but nevertheless I'll try and make this as good as we can if it gets approved. Obviously, our officer, Councillor Gavin, Mr. Spiller, has already raised that he can add a condition regarding the glazing. Now, obviously, at site, we're only talking about the 4th storey. I do believe we need to consider all 4 storeys on that side facing the woods, because particularly, as we've said on Block 2, we are very close to the woods on Block 2 in particular, and I don't see that dark glazing on the 4th floor is going to make a blind bit of difference when you've got 3 floors as close below it, affecting the wildlife. We've already got a condition for external lighting, which I'm happy with. Block 2 I struggle with anyway. The only other condition I'm unsure of, and I keep looking at the reference to the plans, etc., is to the definitive height of the 3 blocks, because each block is a different height because the ground level moves. Now, we have various plans in here that show various cut sections, but none that I can see definitively peg the heights of the 3 blocks. And I would like those 3 blocks definitive heights set, that they should not be above, for certainty for residents and everyone else, especially with changing ground levels and everything else that we keep talking about. We know how past developments have happened and what happens with it. So that's where I am at present with conditions, if this gets approved. And go from there. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I ask Mr. Spiller to come back and respond to that, please?
Yeah, of course. Regards to the glazing, I agree. There's no point doing the 4th floor if you're not going to do the rest of the floors, because they could have really bright lights on, which would undo any of the good work that you've done. So happy to word a condition for the specification of the glazing prior to its installation to be agreed. I'm content we can add that. In terms of the floor level, what we'd usually say is finished floor level in relation to an identifiable datum point, and then we agree those. I was just trying to look on the drawings to see if we got those. I thought we had, but I can't be sure for certain. So we can add the condition on, and then we can see where we go from then, just so that we're certain of what the finished floor level, and then we can enforce it if it's higher, lower, etc.
Thank you. Could I ask the proposer and seconder if they're happy with those conditions, please?
I think what I might like to add to that is that I absolutely agree with what's been put forward. I'm more than happy that if we're talking about some principles, but Gavin Spiller wants to go back and have a look and to look at that's great, fine, and it sounds like we've probably got the data, but he just wants to be sure that within the proposal that Councillor Woodward and I make, I'm more than happy that some of the negotiation that may need to be done with the officer, with the ward member, with yourself, Chair, and perhaps Vice Chair, is that if some of these things that we've sorted these principles out between ourselves as a committee, and we're agreeing upon those principles, and the things that Councillor Howes put down, more than happy to work with yourselves in working that up, because you don't have some of the answers to the questions right now, and I don't think you really need to, because we've got the principles of what we want to do, and I'm more than happy with the confidence in you guys and everybody actually getting into a good place to make sure it's right, along with the ward member. So I'm happy with that. If you want those conditions to run along on those lines, more than happy. I don't know how Councillor Woodward, if he's...
Councillor Key, I don't allow people to come back now that you
No,
heard
but
that in the last meeting, unless you've got something new or an amendment.
As a protocol, my name was mentioned, and I just wanted to point out to Councillor Davey that
the extension to the Winslade house is in keeping because it's all incorporated in it. This, on the top of these buildings, looks like something that's been plonked on after they did the drawings.
Thank you. Right, I see no other hands up, so go to Mr. Hunter, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong.
Can you put your mic on?
Yeah, sorry. Thank you, Chair. My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, Councillor Skinner, is that you are recommending approval subject to the conditions outlined in the officer's report and 2 additional conditions. One in respect of the specification of the glazing in relation to all 4 stories of the proposed development, and a further condition regarding the definitive height of the 3 blocks to be made clear in the condition, and both of these conditions to be negotiated and agreed with the chair and ward members.
Vice chair and officers.
Yeah, chair, vice chair and ward member.
Well, I'm assuming it's the chair and vice chair. I always thought it was. I'm just.
No, that's fine.
That's fine.
So if we can put that to the vote then, Chair, if you can, at the required time, vote in favour of that or against that, or indicate if you wish to abstain. Thank you.
Should we do it by roll call?
Yeah.
Okay, so Councillor Brown.
Against.
Councillor Chamberlain.
Support.
Councillor Davey.
Support.
Councillor De Sarum.
Against.
Councillor Howe.
Against.
Councillor Key.
Against.
Councillor Pratt.
Against.
Councillor Rylance.
Reluctantly support.
Councillor Skinner.
Support.
Councillor Woodward.
Support.
Councillor Ragg.
Support.
So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in support, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 against. So that is approved.
Thank you, Wendy. That brings our meeting to a close, and I'd like to thank everyone and members of the public for attending today, also those who may be watching on Zoom. Thank you very much. That went better than I thought.